Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to the Renaissance Yorkshireman podcast. Today, I'd like to continue talking about education, and specifically, I'd like to look at some of the assumptions and some of the research about what would create a really functional education system. So firstly, I'd like to give you two quotes, and both of them come from The Learning Curve, Lessons in Country Performance in Education, which is a 2012 report by the Economist Intelligence Unit. And I believe that since then there has been an updated version of this report, but both of the quotes I'm giving you come from the 2012 version. And the first one says this: educators might hope that this or similar bodies of research would yield the Holy Grail. Identification of the input or set of inputs that above all else leads to better educational results wherever it is applied. Alas, if this report makes nothing else clear, it is that no such magic bullets exist at an international level, or at least they cannot as yet be statistically proven. Nonetheless, our research, which is also based on insights gathered from experts around the world, provides some definite signposts. 1. Culture is extremely important. 2. There is no substitute for good teachers. 3. There is no single path to greater educational outcomes. And the second quote I'd like to read you is from the same report, but it's from Brian Steacher, who is Associate Director at RAND Education. And he states, "We use jargon that seems to explain student behaviour, but we really don't understand the way students learn and the complex mix of inputs, family, community and learning, that lead to skills and temperament. If you compare research in education to research in healthcare, you see a dramatic difference in our knowledge of cause and effect." There's a number of issues here. First of all, research in education is less straightforward than in many other fields. So it's more complicated. There are no simple solutions. In the UK, it was quite common when I was younger for Conservative politicians to get up and say, "We need to get back to basics, the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic." This is an ideological position. It's not based on evidence. And one of the problems with educational policy, certainly in the UK, but I believe in most countries in the world, there are exceptions, but in most countries of the world, educational policy is set by ideologically driven politicians. It's not set by educational researchers, and it's not set by teachers. Now, occasionally, some of these politicians will give lip service to the research and lip service to talking to the teachers, but in general, it's not being driven by research about educational outcomes. It's been driven by ideology. And I've got one further quote, and this is from Professor Robert Schwartz of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And he says, "The single most important input variable in education is the quality of teaching." So, despite the fact that it is complicated, we do know a number of things. 1, there is no substitute for quality teaching, and quality teaching is the single most important factor. However, just because you have quality teachers in an education system, that does not guarantee that you will get quality educational outcomes for the students. So in mathematical terms, quality teachers are necessary, but they are not sufficient. We need other factors as well. So I want to pick up on the first quote, which gave 3 signposts. And it said, "Culture is extremely important. There's no substitute for good teachers. There is no single path to greater educational outcomes. And if we look at which countries are consistently rated as having the best educational outcomes, 3 of those countries are Finland, Singapore, and South Korea. In the South Korean and Singapore model, they're very often categorized by A, a high level of discipline, and B, being teacher-led. So what would commonly be referred to as traditional approaches to teaching. But in the Finnish model, it's more characterized by less discipline, whereby the students have more autonomy in the classroom and the students' input is valued, what would often be referred to as non-traditional teaching methods, touchy-feely teaching methods. And some teachers, when you talk to them about these kind of issues, they'll say, it has to be discipline, the teacher has to lead it, it's got to be traditional method. And then you'll get another set of teachers who'll say, oh no, you've got to be in touch with your feelings, you've got to communicate with the kids and understand them. Both of these approaches can work. It depends on the circumstances which they find themselves in. Some children, and adults as well, respond really well to lots of discipline in the classroom. Some students react in absolutely the opposite way. Those students need very little discipline, but they need autonomy and they need to feel ownership over what happens in the classroom. So these 2 extremes of traditional methods and touchy-feely methods, they can work, and anything in between can work. It depends on the context in which you find yourself in, and it depends on resources, it depends on organisation, it depends on curriculum, it depends on a myriad of factors. Although the Finnish model is distinctly different from the Singaporean and South Korean model in terms of discipline and student participation, something that all 3 systems have in common is 1, respect for education and learning. 2, respect for teachers within society and well-paid teachers and not overburdening teachers with work. So teachers have a work week which is quite reasonable. Here in the UK, there are many teachers who are employed on a full-time basis. Their contract says you work 37.5 hours a week because this is the law in the UK. However, many of those teachers are working 50 or 60 hours a week, and yet they're not getting paid any more. But if you're only contracted for 37.5 hours a week and you're working nearly 60 hours a week, then basically you're doing 50% on top of your agreed legally binding contract that you are not being paid for. I would argue that this shows a complete lack of respect from the UK government towards teachers, which is in great contrast to what happens in, say, Singapore, South Korea, and Finland. And I'd like to give you one more quote, and this is from Professor Rita Dunn. And she observes, if a child is not learning the way you are teaching, then you must teach in the way the child learns. Of course, children are not all the same. If you're a parent like me, and let's say you have 3 children, I bet you don't get them mixed up, do you? And what works with one child may not work with another child. The problem for teachers and for creating a functional education system is this is complicated and nuanced, and it means we need a nuanced and intelligent approach to education for what's going to work for the student. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, whatever any politician may tell you, there simply isn't. Because students and children are not all the same. They have different temperaments and different ways that they respond. It's not rocket science. In the next few videos, I'll go into more details of particular interventions, and what I'm going to look at will always be evidence-based, because although I have my experience of a teacher, we must also go with the evidence, because as an individual, you can't always generalize your experiences to such a broad topic as a functional education system. Thank you for giving me your time today. Peace.